So, are you community pharmacists looking to get out pharmacy? You know, a lot of time on my channel, I talk about different career paths and how to get out of pharmacy using going outside of pharmacy. So in today's podcast, I actually interview Blair. If you don't know who Blair is, she's the CEO of Pharmapreneur Academy, which is basically teaching everyday community pharmacists how to open up their own consulting practice and pretty much leave their traditional 9 to 5. It was really, really cool. I actually had a blast talking to her because she was really talking about, a lot of time on my channel I talk about high income skills, and she talks about how to use a high income skill of pharmacy to open up your own practice. So if you don't like your typical 9 to 5, typical community pharmacy, or maybe you're a hospital pharmacy looking for a way out for more freedom, this is a really, really great way. She also hosts a lot of virtual summits, pharmacy virtual summits. She's the first one that I know that is doing one. Hell, maybe in the future, maybe I'll do one too. But I thought it was really, really cool because she's really, I love her vision, just because she's really changing the way that not only healthcare professionals, how they look at pharmacists, but also on the patient side too. So I love it. If you don't know what pharmacy consulting is, please watch this video, but I know that you guys will enjoy it. Sit back, take a drink, and watch this whole video in its entirety. I guarantee that you will like it. So by the end of this video, if you do want to do something like pharmacy consulting and you do sign up for a program, use my affiliate link. It helps me out, helps you out, helps her out. It's a win-win-win for everyone. And also, if you want to follow Blair, I also have all her links below. So make sure to follow her. But don't forget, if you want to support my channel, use my affiliate link. Shameless plug. Awesome, Blair. It's so nice actually having you here because I've actually, you know what, I actually don't know that much about you, but I've heard so much about you through like people like Tony, the PharmD and whatnot, and I see you in the same social circles as me. So it's really, really great that you just took the time today just to come on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things I always like to uncover is that for people that are listening to this, you are the CEO of Pharmapreneur Academy, right?
Yes, that is correct. Started it back in 2015, so going on 3.5 years now.
Love it. I always like grabbing like the origin stories of like fellow entrepreneurs, especially pharmacy entrepreneurs, because it's really not as when people think pharmacy entrepreneurship, I don't know about your experience, but through my experience, everybody's like talking about opening up a pharmacy. And I thought it was really, really cool that you kind of figured an alternative path outside of just the traditional starting up an independent pharmacy. So I'm kind of curious, how did all this like initially start?
Well, so way back in 2014, I'd been working as a clinical hospital pharmacist for about 3 years. I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter
Yeah.
when I got the news handed down that they were basically cutting my position. And it was a small rural hospital facing budget cuts. They only had room for one clinical pharmacist.
Mm.
And the director of pharmacy had been there 17 years. So I was the low man on the totem pole. So I got all my benefits got cut, and I got cut to PRN hours.
Mm.
So being 6 months pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? This is a terrible time to go out and try to look for a job. Who's going to hire me? I'm going to have to take a maternity leave in just a few months. So I had got my name out there in the local independent community pharmacy scene as like someone who would do extra shifts, trying to pay off my student loans. So people already knew me as someone they could call for like relief work. So I basically just called up all my friends that owned pharmacies and told them, hey, if you want some time off, I'm not doing anything for the next few months, before I have my daughter. So that's really how it started. And then because of my clinical background, I was doing like renal dosing of antibiotics and Coumadin and kind of all that stuff.
Yeah.
When I went to community pharmacy, they told me, they were like, there's these things we have to do called MTMs. You know, it's hard to do when you're manning the bench and you've got this clinical background and you know more about these medications. Why don't you just do them for me? And so I did. I didn't know how to do a CMR or how to bill. Like, I was really scared of billing for these MTM services at first, because I was like, what if I do something wrong? And, you know, I don't know if I'm doing the documentation right. So I had a friend kind of walk me through the first few cases, and I took the APHA's MTM certification class and started doing some CMRs on my own, just kind of taught myself how to do it, and pretty much took over these MTM programs for these pharmacies. I ended up training their staff members how to do like the tips and adherence stuff. And I really loved it. Like, I didn't love my job as a clinical hospital pharmacist, but doing the MTMs, I was like, I really love that. So I want to do more of that. So I started trying to figure out, you know, went to Google and like, how do I build a pharmacy consulting business? I want to do this full time for as many pharmacies as I can handle. How am I going to grow that business? So that's what I started trying to do after I had my daughter, probably late 2014, early 2015. And that was my focus, was learning all about MTM and billable pharmacy services and star ratings. And yeah, all the fun stuff that we're like, you know, you hear these buzzwords like pay for performance and value-based care. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know what that means, but I guess I'll figure it out. And so my husband calls me the queen of research. So that's pretty much what I did for a whole year, was just researched as much as I could about billable pharmacy services.
Dude, I love that story because you really outlined the whole journey of becoming a complete novice, complete beginner to almost an authority level or expert where people are going to you. Can you tell me, I'm kind of curious, your first CMR or your first tip claim or whatever, do you remember the first time you had to do that?
I'm pretty sure it was not very helpful to the patient the first time I did it. I mean, I had a friend kind of walk me through using the online MTM platform. So I knew how to use it, but I felt like I was all over the place and jumping from one thing to another. Oh, I forgot to ask you about your allergies. Oh, I forgot to ask you about your vaccination status or whatever. So I was jumping back and forth a lot. And then it was like, okay, now that I've created this medication action plan and the comprehensive medication list, I'm supposed to send them to your doctor and like anxiously await their response.
Yeah.
And I did so many things wrong that now that I've kind of done it more, there's definitely certain tips and tricks that I use. Like, one of the things, if there's a specific recommendation I want to make sure they see and get across to them, I'll type up my notes and documentation, and then I'll print them off, and then I'll go back in my own handwriting with a pen and write in my own handwriting, recommendation, change, statin to something else.
Yeah.
And so that helps to kind of grab their attention so that they're not like, do I actually have to read all this 8 pages? And then it makes it easier to follow up with. So I can just call the nurse and be like, hey, did you get my note?
Yeah.
And they can easily see that there's been a handwritten note on there.
I love that pattern interrupts. We have this thing called in copywriting pattern interrupts and all that. And it's just like when somebody takes the time to handwrite something out, it gets our attention, especially in such a digital world. I love that. How did you come up with that? Or was it to be a friend that introduced that kind of like tip and trick to you?
No, that was definitely something that I kind of figured out along the way, is
Mm.
just how to grab the prescriber's attention with my recommendations. Um, Another thing, my friend Eric Christensen at MedEd 101, he shared, was like the difference between a SOAP note and an El Paso note, where you kind of start with the problem in mind. So you start with the biggest, idea, and kind of work your way
Yeah.
backwards. So that was what I thought, is like, if they want the background of the clinical reasons of why I'm making this recommendation, they
Mm.
can always contact me for more information. I don't want to send them more information than they really want to know about this.
Yeah.
And one thing about working in a community pharmacy is you are limited. I was used to being in the clinical hospital setting, so I would have access to their creatinine clearance and, height and weight and all that, and be able to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
And in the community pharmacy, unless you fax ahead of time and get a demographic sheet on the patient, you're probably not going to know their labs going into it. So you can't, jump right in recommending something and then find out later they're like renal insufficient. So
Yeah.
that's kind of something to keep in mind. Little things that you learn along the way. So
Yeah.
what I was learning throughout the process of building that consulting business, I've always enjoyed writing and blogging and, doing stuff on the internet. Like, I used to have this blog about gardening. Well, I created this new blog about my MTM consulting business.
Yeah.
And the idea was, I'm going to talk about MTM consulting, and then hopefully pharmacies in Northeast Arkansas and Southeast Missouri, where I live, are going to want to hire me to come in and do this. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
What happened is, the more I was learning and sharing about this stuff, I was also sharing it on LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff. I would have other pharmacists contact me and was like, I want to do this too. I want to go out and work for community pharmacies, or I want to go work in a physician's office as an independent consultant. Like, how do you do that? How would you be able to bill for that?
Yeah.
And so through that process, I kept researching, how pharmacists could work in physicians' office, how we can bill to do annual wellness visits and see patients incident to the physician. And as I collected all this information and this research,
Mhm.
I began putting it in one place, which is what became the e-course at the Pharmapreneur Academy. And that was the course that I created for pharmacists that want to learn more about billing for pharmacist services and how to really go out and pitch themselves to working for providers in primary care, or working, doing an MTM program in a community pharmacy.
I really love that too. It sounded like, listening to all that, it sounded like, you had some experience blogging from like doing gardening and whatnot. That's really funny. And then you kind of transitioned into MTM, and honestly, you were just kind of sharing all the things that you were learning, because this was kind of new to you. And that's the beauty of it. I think Gary Vee puts it, he always has this saying, document, don't create. Right? And all you were doing was just documenting your learning process. And it's so cool about the internet these days, because you can learn literally anything these days. And by sharing all that, other pharmacists were like, wow, I want to learn from this person. Because I love blogging too. You get to show your personality, you have your different styles and stuff. But it sounded like you were answering these questions and really teaching pharmacists, everyday pharmacists, to position themselves to bill for services and whatnot. Um, just kind of curious, who are the most common people that stumble upon your blog?
So that's a good question. It's people that are looking for, like, usually they Google pharmacy consulting, MTM consulting, side hustles in pharmacy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they'll come across and they'll say, well, I want to start a consulting business, but I'm into functional medicine and I want to have a cash-based practice with a chiropractic office, seeing patients and recommending, certain supplements based on their genetic profile.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's incredibly specific. But using these marketing methods that I've developed for pharmacists, I can help you kind of define your audience, define your target market and who you can help, then come up with a pitch that's not going to be all about you. No one wants to hear, oh, I went and got my APHA certificate in MTM, consulting, but they want to hear what I can do for you. Oh, I can take a look at your grandmother's medications and, see if maybe her constipation's being caused by one of her medications. See if there's something better that we can get her on that she won't be having so much discomfort. And you phrase it in a way with what the patient result is going to be, or if you're working with a physician, you want to go work with them. Don't you hate doing prior authorizations and refill requests and dealing with these very complex medication regimens that you don't know whether the patient's actually on what they're saying they're on? So, you have to call the pharmacy and figure out a med list. Don't you hate doing that? Don't you wish you had someone to come in and do that for you? Yeah, so it's putting yourself in kind of a different mindset instead of like, here's my resume, here's why you should hire me.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like coming from their point of view. It's like, what am I going to get out of hiring you?
Yeah, I love it. It's very value based. You're very result and problem oriented, and you're really focusing on the main pain points of a practice and whatnot. And it just sounds like, I don't know. I'm kind of curious. Have you ever taken I definitely know that, like, the answer to this question, because the way you speak, I definitely know that you've like studied some marketing and stuff and learning the basics about business, or actually more than just the basics, but definitely how did you what was your process of like learning all that sort of stuff when you're starting Pharmapreneur Academy?
So the first thing I ever invested in when it came to my business back in 2015,
Yeah.
I invested in a business coach.
Yeah.
So $1,500 for a business coach, and I thought I was going to throw up whenever I signed up for that and put that charge on my credit card, because I was like, I'm not a business person. I don't do business. I'm a pharmacist. I don't know how to market myself. I don't want to sound sleazy when I'm selling my services to people. That, all that, like, limiting beliefs that we create, that we're the ones holding ourselves back. So that was the first big investment I made. Since then, I've invested in masterminds, business coaching, online training programs.
Yeah.
I'm leaving for London on Sunday to go participate in an entrepreneurial mastermind with a small group of female business owners. They're not pharmacists, but they're entrepreneurs in the space. And so, I mean, I would say probably tens of thousands of dollars at this point invested in personal development, professional development work.
Yeah. Love it. Did you tell a lot of people that when you first signed on with a business coach and when you first made that initial investment, did you tell a lot of the people around you? And if so, what did they kind of say to you?
Oh man, this is tough. So they were very concerned that I was throwing away this, like, such a good job, like
I know that feeling all too well, man.
like, why would you focus on building this business when you have such a good job as a pharmacist? And my husband, he was concerned because he was like, I just don't want to see you waste all this time on trying to build something that doesn't sound like anyone's going to be interested in. And they were coming from a loving place. They weren't like, you can't do it, but they were, my mom, she was concerned because I had a baby, my daughter was a baby, and she was concerned that it would be taking time away from my family, like adding another thing to my plate. So they were definitely coming from a loving place because none of them are entrepreneurs, and they didn't see why I wanted this, why I was being called to share this message, with other people and do kind of like the business coaching, personal development work. But now on the other side of it, they were like, what kind of business could I do? Like, so they're believers. I've converted them into believers now.
Yeah. How did you kind of deal with that? Because I know, like, for example, like when I first hired a coach, like a business coach or anything like that, or any sort of mentorship, there was I got a lot of the same sentiments as you. There was a lot of people in my life who were kind of concerned, right? How exactly did you kind of cope or handle that during that time? Because it can be awfully lonely, like kind of going down this path.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. And that's where the masterminds really came in. Is like, I didn't have anyone in my personal life that I could talk to about, do you like this marketing? Which headshot do you like better? Like, what should I do about this?
Yeah.
And those mastermind groups. So in 2016, I was in a 6-month mastermind for like new entrepreneurs. In 2017, I was in a more advanced mastermind for women with like 6-figure businesses and above. So we were talking about hiring issues and management type stuff, in addition to just the logistics of running a business.
Yeah.
In 2018, I took off because I had another child. I had my son at the end of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year, I'm in another year-long mastermind with, very high-level business women that I can, post a copy of an email and say, what do you guys think of this? Is there anything you would change? Would you buy this? Do you like this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
And so the mastermind thing it was helpful to make me feel like other people get me and other people get why I'm trying to do this. And then, after a while, people jumped on board. Like every time I got a new member, I would tell my husband, oh, somebody else joined the course. Like, we're over 100 now. Like, just kind of that reinforcing that it is working. And there were some tough conversations. Like one time I was talking to my mom about creating the virtual summit that I have, the Elevate Pharmacy Virtual Summit. And I was talking to her, and she kind of like was looking at me for a little while. And then after a while, she just like picked up her phone and was so I texted her later, and I was like, that kind of hurt my feelings that I was trying to share like this really big thing that I was working on with you. And she was like, I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And so, having those conversations definitely has helped too.
Yeah. I know for me, it's been super, super important to have like those supporting people in my life, man. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Like there's not too many people in the world where you can be like, hey, check out my email copy.
Yeah.
Like,
right?
what do you think about the CTA? What do you think about the hook and stuff? And I don't know, me and my friends, we always geek out over that stuff. And
me too.
yeah, right. Like there's nothing more, to me, there's nothing more solid than a really, really well-built funnel and stuff. So totally understand what that's all about. I'm kind of curious. I mean, you said you have 2 kids right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
How,
Yes.
how how is it like balancing like this pharmacy entrepreneur life and managing the family? I'm always kind of curious about that balance.
So, there's definitely times like, so we're kind of in launch mode right now that I just tell my husband, y'all need to do frozen pizza for dinner. Don't expect me home. And then there's times that I'm like, oh, I don't have a lot going on.
Yeah.
I can spend more time with them. So it's really, I mean, I just feel like my whole life is like,
Yeah.
you know, constantly. So I'm leaving for London, like I said, in a few days, and I'm going to be
Yeah.
away from them for a while.
Yeah.
But to me, the trade-off is like my kids seeing me do something that I love and I'm really passionate about. They never hear me say, oh, I have to go into my office to
Yeah.
work today. Like they see what I'm doing, especially my daughter, because she's almost 5 and she
Mhm.
understands a little bit more about, work and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
She understands that I enjoy what I do and it brings me a lot of joy and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So there's that as well, as like when I'm feeling the mom guilt
Yeah.
about, working long days or in not paying attention to them whenever I'm at home because I have to do, like, I have to finish up an email sequence or something. It's like, well, but I get a 4-day weekend because I'm the one that sets my own schedule. So
Yeah.
I make it up to them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like if you were to have your 2 kids while you were a pharmacist, do you think it'd be a lot harder to have that like work-life balance, or would you think it would be roughly the same right now? What are your
So
thoughts about that?
I think it would definitely be tougher, whether you're employed as a pharmacist or you own a pharmacy, whatever that looks like for you, it's
Yeah.
much more difficult to be flexible.
Mm.
Whereas if you own a business, even like consulting,
Yeah.
say you want to go work in a doctor's office two
Yeah.
days a week. Well, you're kind of the one setting your own schedule. Say, I only want to work Mondays and Tuesdays or whatever works for the physician you're working with as well. You
Yeah.
can be much more flexible. Or like if you're doing MTMs in a community pharmacy, a lot of that you can do now over the phone. So if you're working for, say, like a local community pharmacy, you may only be seeing the patients for the CMRs face to face once a year, and the rest of the year you're calling them to make sure they're, setting up their med sync programs,
Yeah.
like helping that pharmacy set up the med sync and calling them, making these adherence checks. So I think there's ways to even create a side business in addition to your full-time job. It
Mm.
would definitely be hard. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is easy at all, but it's really something that I think you can dip your toe into the water and kind of build it up as you go.
Yeah.
And it is something more flexible that can work around family time.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's great. Like something like pharmacy consulting is really a great business model for people who are already pharmacists and people who want more control, I guess, over the schedule. Because, face it, a lot of pharmacists, especially if you're in community, you're gonna have to work a lot of holidays and stuff like that. That's a huge pain point for us. So it sounds like it's really cool. I kind of want to circle back because I forgot, and we never really talked about what exactly is pharmacy consulting, right? Can you give us kind of like a breakdown, maybe like, you know, yeah, just a overall breakdown of what pharmacy consulting is and what does a typical day as a pharmacy consultant, what can it look like? I know it depends on a lot of different factors, but what can it look like?
So I use the word consultant to refer to offering one-on-one clinical services.
Mhm.
So sometimes when people say consultant, they mean like in a long-term care setting, a licensed pharmacy consultant in long-term care. That's not necessarily what I mean. I mean, you can do that, but that's kind of a difficult market to break into if you don't have specific licensing. I know I'm in the state of Arkansas. You have to have a license for consulting to be able to work in long-term care. So that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about as a consultant is leveraging your clinical skills to create a program where you're working directly with patients. So it could be doing an MTM program where you're offering comprehensive medication reviews on behalf of a pharmacy owner that doesn't have time to do them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could be running a tobacco cessation program or diabetic education or a vaccine clinic. Or you could be going into a physician's office and working under a collaborative agreement with the physician to do annual wellness visits or chronic care management. Or it could even mean, as like in the case of the functional medicine pharmacist, having a cash paying program that you work one-on-one with patients. You can collaborate with a synergistic business or have a standalone practice where you're doing weight management or you're doing health and wellness consults or you're doing genetic testing. So there's a lot of opportunities in consulting. And I think the goal with like the Elevate Pharmacy Virtual Summit was I just went out and found a lot of pharmacists that were doing innovative, cool things. And, you know, imagine if you were like at a conference and you just sat through a 1-hour CE lecture and they presented their model and they talked about how they're impacting patients. Okay, now they're coming down off the stage to sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and you can ask them questions for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's exactly like what the virtual summit really is.
Yeah.
And I identified these pharmacists in like cool, innovative models so that I could share their stories and their experiences. And that was really the goal with the Elevate Summit, is to show these clinical services that you can offer in addition to, or, you know, alongside other collaborative providers.
Love it. And I know, like, well, great job with the virtual summit, by the way, and kind of coordinating that. But I know there's some pharmacists kind of sitting here and thinking like, hey, why would anyone want to hire me for pharmacy consulting, right? Sometimes when we ask those type of questions, we get so caught up in our own heads. But what kind of impact, I guess, if pharmacists were to go down pharmacy consulting, what kind of impact do they have on the healthcare system and actually on the practices? Like, I know there's a lot of different opportunities, but what impact could we potentially have for these practices and impact on healthcare?
This is a great question. So I mentioned value-based care.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's kind of a buzzword right now. What essentially it means was there was legislation passed in the MACRA Act. It was the Medicare Reauthorization Act or something like that. And so essentially what the MACRA legislation did was create these two different routes of reimbursement. So the primary care clinic could choose to be a MIPS clinic and choose a certain set of quality metrics to be graded on, or they could choose the advanced payment model, which is more similar to like a per member per month flat fee. So MIPS is more like traditional Medicare, just reimbursement, you know, fee for reimbursement.
Yeah.
But they're choosing these quality metrics to be graded on. So one thing I coach Academy members to do is we talk about the different quality metrics that pharmacists can impact. So for example, getting an A1C below 7%.
Yeah.
That's one of the quality metrics that many primary care physicians may choose. So you go in, and I kind of already mentioned the pitch where it's like helping reduce burnout. But identify their pain point is being hit with all these penalties because they're not meeting these quality metrics, you can kind of shift your pitch to, okay, I'm going to focus on your diabetic patients, the ones whose A1C is always above 7. They say they're taking their medication the way they're supposed to. They say they're using their insulin every day. They say they're not eating carbs. Like, these are the people that I want to come into your practice and help. Yeah. So as we do that, we learn that they can't draw up their insulin correctly because they can't see well enough on the vial, and so they just don't take it, or it makes them squeamish or whatever it may be. So having an impact on these quality metrics can translate into hundreds of thousands of dollars, like in decreased reimbursement, in penalties, in incentive payments if they do meet their benchmarks. And then it also reduces readmissions. So a lot of the return on investment for pharmacist services, the studies that have been done, the journal articles, I've got probably 5 journal articles right here that I've been needing to go through, that talk about pharmacists embedded in primary care and what the return on investment looks like. So reduce readmission rate, keeping people out of the ER, keeping people on, from advancing COPD or CHF, just better management of these very complex chronic conditions that they need to have someone on their team that gives them more touch points. So it may look like going in as a pharmacist and doing chronic care management. Chronic care management is using the CPT billing code 99490 to bill for a once a month, non-face-to-face, 20-minute patient touch point. So it really makes a lot of sense for a pharmacist to do this. And what we're seeing now is even community pharmacies partnering with local physicians' offices to kind of pick up the slack whenever it comes to like, hey, we're talking to them once a month anyway about their refills and their adherence issues. So why not have a partnership to where you can be reimbursed for those services and the physician's billing for them, and you're working together to offer this better patient care?
Wow, that's a huge win-win situation, win-win outcome for both not only the practice and the pharmacist as well. So it sounds like you mentioned a few things. Obviously, there's the financial incentive, like to have a pharmacy consultant on board because there's increased reimbursement. You talked a little bit about increased quality of care as well. We talked about decreased hospital admissions, but even from a more macro sense, like the truth is there's a lot of primary care physicians out there. There's a lot of different practitioners out there. At the end of the day, what differentiates this one from this one, right? But when you have such an intimate level, it sounds like, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it's pretty high. You said high touch point, right? So there's probably a lot more interaction. That's really what keeps people with you and whatnot as well. And from a brand, from a marketing perspective, from a brand and positioning, man, that's a really great, unique selling proposition for most people. Love it.
I think it's going to allow physicians to see more complex patients, and see more patients, and have someone that they feel is providing that kind of like different view. So one of the Elevate Summit interviews that I just recently did was with a pharmacist physician collaborative team. So there were 3 of us on the call. So, I said, Dr. Pettis, you've been working with a pharmacist for, 9 months now. What would you say to the pharmacist or physician out there that says, why would I hire a pharmacist? They're too expensive. Why wouldn't I just hire an MA instead?
Yeah.
And his response is like, I want someone who is trained differently than me. He was like, PAs and APNs, they're trained in the same way that I am, but a pharmacist is trained in a completely different way. They're looking at it from a different lens. They're, they've kind of got their pharmacist glasses on, and they're saying, could this symptom be medication related? Is there a better way to optimize this person's therapy? And he's like, this, I think, in the future is going to be much more commonplace. And the title of that interview was like reimagining primary care. So
Yeah.
I have this vision of pharmacists being able to work in physicians' offices and it being as commonplace as having a PA or an APN in the practice.
Mm.
So I think that can help, alleviate the job shortage, or job saturation. I think it can help with burnout, and I think it can really, my ultimate goal and the tagline, it's not just a tagline for the Academy, is advancing the profession of pharmacy. And I feel like we can do that by working in these innovative type models.
I love that. Actually, as you're talking, I actually was taking like some notes so I wouldn't forget some of the thoughts. But one of the things that I wrote down was like, dude, you're really changing, I guess, the branding or how people perceive pharmacists and really expanding the scope of practice of pharmacists. Because when you go to anyone out on the street, you ask them, what does a pharmacist do? Their vision of a pharmacist is that 1950s pharmacist, just counting pills and that's it. But really, I love this because you're not only like you're really impacting and changing the perception of pharmacists even within the healthcare system, because even a lot of healthcare professionals don't really know what we do, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I love that. That's awesome.
I think, one thing too is like, I love what you said about kind of rebranding ourselves.
Yeah.
And one thing I hear from physicians is like, where do I find pharmacists that can do this? Where do I find pharmacists that can help me with this?
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, okay, maybe we need like a match.com for physicians who want embedded clinical pharmacists. And you just come through the academy. I'll match you up with a local physician, and it'll match made in heaven.
Oh, that's so funny. That's awesome. Like, because you know what, when I first took a look at your pharmapreneur type of thing, I didn't really see that vision, but actually hearing you talk about it, I really see the clearer picture. And I think it's actually a really, really great model for a lot of pharmacists, because not everyone wants to like do a different business model. Like for me, I like to introduce people to different business models, like, hey, Amazon FBA or other things. But this is a great way where you can use your high income skill and apply it directly to a business model. And just kind of curious, what are the initial, like, are there initial startup costs with this sort of business model for the most part?
So I usually recommend that people go ahead and do an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
You could do a sole proprietorship with it, but I think the LLC just gives you an extra layer of liability.
Yeah.
You can actually get liability insurance on the LLC.
Mm-hmm.
So like professional healthcare liability insurance on the LLC.
Yeah.
So that's really like kind of our foundation of the academy, is like figuring out what pieces do you need to have in place so that you can confidently build a business on top of it. So, the LLC is always something that I recommend. And then just as far as marketing, I am a big proponent of like minimum viable product.
MVP.
So MVP, don't go waste your money on building out a website when you don't even know what your pricing or your product or any of that stuff is. Like, I was talking to someone this morning,
Yeah.
and I said, first thing that people do when they start a business is go get a business card. And I did the same thing. So I mean, I'm guilty. So
Yeah.
I just got this is my second business card thing ever. And it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
And I just bought a new stack of them because nobody wants your business cards. So what they want is you to go out and have conversations with them and talk about how you can help them. That's what they really want to hear. So that doesn't cost much either. So just kind of putting together a few basic things and basic ideas. There's lots of free resources on my website that's just kind of get you started on thinking about, here's the different opportunities that you could possibly look into.
Yeah, I love that because it's really funny. In high school, I started this protein company and whatnot. And the first thing that we did, we bought business cards, right? I still have that same stack back in high school to this day. And I think it really goes back to what you're saying, like focus on the problem, be problem and result oriented, and talk to other people, see what kind of problems they're going through, and just really kind of see if you can help. And I think like if there's one common theme throughout your whole story is that this whole time you've just been solving problems, whether it was like, working at independent pharmacy and they needed help with their MTM claims. And then people were asking you like, hey, how do I open up my pharmacy consulting practice, right? You are just constantly solving problems, and you're currently solving a huge problem in pharmacy right now with our branding and all that. I love it. I think this is like a burning question a lot of listeners are probably thinking about, but what is kind of like, I know everybody's timeline is very different, but I guess like from start to finish, how long, people are going to ask, how long does it take? Or what are the kind of like the steps from start to finish, I guess, right? If they were to go into Pharmapreneur Academy.
So that's a good question. I'm trying to rework the course so we have more of like a success pathway kind of thing.
Sure.
So 1 to 3 months out, the goals are registering your LLC, identifying your target market, reaching out to potential leads, and having your first meetings, your first face-to-face meetings. Hopefully by the end of the 3 months, you're going to get some real interest in these services. The first meetings are like going in there I'm creating like an assessment questionnaire of like what say if you're going into a physician's office, what their needs are, what their pain points are, and using this kind of assessment questionnaire to determine, which services or programs could you build out for them. And then the next 3 to 6 months is kind of putting a proposal together, figuring out like the beta test for it. And then 6 to 8 months is scaling. It's once you've kind of worked through those beta test patients and kind of validated the idea, 6 to 8 months is when you're like, okay, let's fill up this schedule. Let's really start looking into return on investment and tracking these interventions. So whenever I say between 6 to 8 months to build a business, I'm like, you're not sitting on your computer watching my course videos for 6 to 8 months. You are, watching your foundational videos and then doing your homework and taking your action steps. And so there really is a pathway. That being said, some pharmacists come in and after 1 month, they're like, yeah, physicians said that they wanted to hire me 1 day a week and they think it's going to grow into a full-time position. And I'm like, well, that's great. So, it can happen faster, but I would say for most people, just keep in mind that there's, it's something new. You're kind of having to educate the market alongside of creating the product.
Because at the end of the day, I always like to say this because I've bought so many programs myself, right? It's not on the course, man, because the truth is, if you binge watch like Netflix and do absolutely nothing, your business is not gonna just appear like that, right? And so it's really like, yeah, I love that rough roadmap, but what you're really trying to teach people is how to set up your own true business, like your true pharmacy consulting practice. People, like, it's not just a how to get a one-time gig, it's really how to create a sustainable business which you can scale and grow. And I love that vision. I guess like some of your most successful students, like, do they end up being like 6-figure, 7-figure type of business? What's the range? I obviously there's pretty much no cap, assuming that you get more clients, right? But what is the typical, I guess, range of how much can you make? Can you like really replace your full-time income if you're a community pharmacist doing this, right?
Right. So it kind of depends on what you're
Yeah.
doing. So I usually say if you work for, say, between 8 and 10 community pharmacies, just doing an MTM program,
Yeah.
that would be like replacing your full-time salary. So I
Okay.
talk about working on retainer.
Yeah.
I talk about, what to charge for your services, how to organize and track and invoice and
Yeah.
and all the business stuff. There is no clinical skills taught whatsoever in my course. I want to stress that. I'm a business person. And so, with a community pharmacy based business, you're talking consulting for maybe 8 to 10 different pharmacies
Mm.
doing different services. For a physician's office, depending on how many Medicare patients they're seeing, 3 to 4 physicians would probably cover a full-time pharmacist. Now, I've
Mm.
got pharmacists in the academy who are building businesses. They're like working in physicians' offices and then hiring other pharmacists to work under them and then placing them in these settings as well.
Yeah.
So that model would definitely be scalable, but we see a single pharmacist max out pretty quickly in
Yeah.
their patient load, but you can replace a pharmacist's income. It's not going to happen overnight like that, but it is something that, you get 3 or 4 physicians you're working with. Yeah, you're going to have a full-time patient load
Yeah.
versus now you can start, hiring pharmacists and interns and that kind of thing to work under you
Yeah.
and then placing them in the clinics, and then that's a scalable model.
Yeah, that's a classic, very very classic consulting model. One of my
Right.
partners, he was at the Big Four, and he was like, I remember the day he was trying to teach me this. I was like, wow, that's really smart. So you basically that's really great. If you're a good engagement partner or a good client partner, you can actually help other pharmacists kind of find gigs and connect them there, and that's definitely a scalable business. Well, I guess like if people want to kind of learn more about pharmacy consulting, where can they really find you?
So my blog and all the new posts and new information that I put out is on my main website, which is btpharmacyconsulting.com.
Mhm.
And that's where like our free webinars you can find. You can go on there, watch them to learn kind of the basics of pharmacy consulting. I've got a few more advanced webinars on like the macro legislation and quality metrics that are lots of good fun. And then there's of course free downloads that people can use to like streamline their elevator pitch or their star ratings and track those. So there's lots of free resources on that site. The paid course and membership site is pharmapreneuracademy.com. And that's where people can come in, they can go through my signature course teaching them how to build a pharmacy consulting business step by step from start to finish.
Yeah.
And the good thing about that membership is that they get access to me in that course. So there's a forum and a community in there of people that have gone through the course. They answer each other's questions. They
Yeah.
understand what we're working towards. and we share like a similar language around consulting.
Yeah.
And once a month, we all jump on a big Zoom
Zoom
call,
call. Yeah.
just like this, and we talk about, what we're working on, what our goals are for the next month, and we try to hold each other accountable and give each other that support that like I didn't have when I started my business.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, hey, I loved having you on this podcast. I think I learned a lot about this. I definitely know my other viewers, man. There's so many people that want an alternative career. And I think this is based off what you talked about. Like, dude, this is up right along. This is up along a lot of people, a lot of pharmacists' alley. And I think they're going to do really, really great because you don't have to learn a new skill. You already have the skill, right? Now you just need to learn the business acumen and whatnot. So
Yeah, that's what I say, to people who are like, I hate pharmacy. I just want to get out. I would do any other job. I just want to start a business. And I'm like, well, why don't you start a business, but using your pharmacy skills instead of going and learning the real estate market? Like, just use the skills you already have and see where that takes you. You never know where these opportunities might lead.
yeah, and best part, no inventory, relatively low startup costs, and you already have the skills. So it sounds like a perfect fit for a lot of people. All right, Blair, it's so great having you on my podcast. I loved it. And if you want to go check Blair out, I'll have all the links below. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.